She laughed in her face. Right there on the soaking wet asphalt of Route 9 under a sky that had turned the color of charcoal, Officer Diane Mercer looked at the woman standing outside the silver Audi and laughed. Not a polite laugh, not even a nervous laugh. A slow, contemptuous laugh that carried 12 years of unchecked arrogance in every single note. "Honey," Mercer said, leaning close enough that the other woman could smell the stale coffee on her breath, "I don't care if you have a Harvard diploma tattooed on your forehead. Out here. You're just another face in the rain, and I am the only law that matters." The woman standing outside the Audi didn't move, she didn't flinch, she didn't raise her voice. She just looked back at Officer Mercer with eyes so calm, so utterly composed, that Mercer felt the first tiny flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Unease. She shoved it down and reached for her handcuffs. She had no idea that the woman she had just mocked, humiliated, and was about to arrest was the Honorable Judge Vanessa Monroe. Circuit Court Judge, Newark County, 12 years on the bench. A woman who had spent her entire career dismantling exactly the kind of corrupt systems that Officer Diane Mercer had built her entire life inside of. By the time Mercer realized her mistake, it was already too late. The trap had been set, and she had walked straight into it. The night it all began was a Thursday in late November. Newark County sits on the eastern edge of a mid-sized southern state, a place where old money and old grudges live side by side without ever quite resolving. The county seat, a city called Delwood, has a modest skyline, a university, a federal courthouse, and a 12-year tradition of looking the other way when certain officers of the Delwood Police Department did things that didn't bear close examination. Vanessa Monroe had grown up just outside Delwood. She had left at 18 on a full academic scholarship, returned at 29 as an assistant district attorney, and never left again. At 41, she was one of the most respected jurists in the state. She presided over Courtroom 7 of the Newark County Courthouse, a room that had a reputation for being fair, thorough, and when necessary, merciless. That Thursday night, she was driving home from a late sentencing hearing. The roads were slick with the season's first hard rain. Vanessa had the radio low, her mind still parsing the arguments she had heard that afternoon. She was doing 51 miles per hour on a posted 55. Her registration was current. Her insurance was current. Her tail lights were working. There was, by any objective measure, absolutely no lawful reason to pull her over. But Officer Diane Mercer had never let the law get in the way of what she wanted to do. Mercer had been on the Delwood PD for 12 years. In that time, she had received 4 commendations, 11 informal complaints, and a reputation in certain precincts as someone you didn't want to cross. She was not a large woman. She was not particularly loud. What she was methodical. She had developed, over the course of her career, a very specific hunting pattern. She watched the lanes on Route 9 between 8 and midnight. She waited for late-model, high-value vehicles. She paid particular attention when those vehicles were driven by black men and women. And when she saw what she was looking for, she lit them up. She called it running a courtesy check. Her sergeant called it proactive policing. The people she pulled over called it what it was, but in Delwood, their complaints rarely went anywhere. Vanessa saw the lights in her rearview mirror at 10:47 p.m. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, that particular dread that no amount of professional achievement ever fully erases. She put on her signal, checked her mirrors, and guided the Audi carefully onto the gravel shoulder. She rolled her window down exactly 2 inches. She placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel where they could be seen clearly. She had done this before. She knew the protocol. She knew it not just from the law but from the survival instincts passed down through generations. The footsteps on the gravel were unhurried, confident. The flashlight hit her square in the face before she could even see the officer behind it. "License, registration, insurance," said the voice behind the light. "No greeting, no badge number, no reason for the stop." "Good evening, officer," Vanessa said carefully. "Could you tell me the reason for the stop? I'll ask the questions, documents, now." Vanessa kept her voice level. "My documents are in the glove compartment and my purse. I'm going to reach for them slowly. Move fast and you'll regret it." Vanessa retrieved her license and registration and passed them through the crack in the window. The officer snatched them without acknowledgement. There was a long silence. Vanessa could hear the rain on the roof of the car, steady and indifferent. "This your car?" "Yes, it's registered in my name as you'll see." "Where are you coming from?" "The Newark County Courthouse. I had a late hearing." Another pause. "You a lawyer?" "I'm a judge." That was when Mercer laughed, that slow, contemptuous, thoroughly dismissive laugh. "Sure you are, honey." Vanessa didn't respond to that. She sat very still, hands on the wheel, and she began to memorize. Badge number, name tag. The positioning of the cruiser's dashcam, the timestamp on her own phone, which she had not touched. She noted every detail with the same focused precision she brought to a bench hearing. Because she knew with the absolute certainty of someone who had spent 12 years in a courtroom that this moment was not over, it was only beginning. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, may I ask on what grounds? I said, step out. Vanessa opened the door and stepped onto the wet gravel. The rain hit her immediately, soaking through her wool blazer in seconds. She stood straight, chin level, and looked at Officer Mercer directly for the first time. Mercer was in her early 40s with a face sharpened by years of small cruelties. She looked at Vanessa the way certain people look at things they have already decided are beneath them. Hands on the roof. Officer, I have not been told why I've been stopped. I have not been informed of any violation, and I have not been given any lawful basis for this order. I am complying under protest, and I am invoking my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. You've been watching too much television, Mercer said, and she grabbed Vanessa's arm. The handcuffs went on hard and fast. Mercer walked her to the cruiser, hand tight on the back of her neck, and put her in the back seat without reading her rights, without stating a charge, without explanation. From the back seat of the cruiser, through the rain-streaked window, Vanessa watched Mercer walk back to the Audi and lean inside. She was in there for nearly 4 minutes. When she came out, she was holding Vanessa's purse. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them and began building the case. The Delwood Police Department's 3rd Precinct is a squat, utilitarian building on the corner of Brant Avenue and 9th Street. It smells of burned coffee, floor wax, and the particular exhaustion of a building that has processed too much human misery for too many decades. Vanessa had been there before on the other side of things, as a prosecutor, as counsel, as a judge reviewing conditions of a defendant's prior arrest. She had never been there in handcuffs. The booking officer, a young man named Garrett who couldn't have been more than 24, looked up when Mercer walked her in. His eyes went to Vanessa's face. Then to her clothes, still professional, still carrying the unmistakable quality of someone who belongs in a courtroom. Something passed across his expression that might have been doubt. DUI stop, Mercer said, dropping Vanessa's documents on the counter. Resisting, failure to comply, erratic driving. Garrett looked at the documents, he looked at Vanessa. Was there a sobriety test? She refused. Vanessa kept her voice completely even. I did not refuse. I was never offered one. I was removed from my vehicle without cause and transported here without being read my rights or informed of the charges against me. I am formally requesting my phone call, and I am formally requesting legal representation. Mercer leaned on the counter and smiled at Garrett. She's been reciting legal jargon since I put her in the car, textbook entitled civilian. Officer, Vanessa said, you filed a report stating I was driving erratically. Your dashcam has been running since before you activated your lights. The footage exists. I want you to think very carefully about what that footage shows. Mercer's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. Vanessa was placed in a holding cell at 11:23 p.m. It was a concrete box with a metal bench and a drain in the floor. There was one other woman in the cell, a young woman, maybe 22, who had been crying and had the red-eyed, exhausted look of someone who had been there for hours. Vanessa sat down beside her. Are you all right? She asked quietly. The young woman shook her head. My name is Vanessa. What did they bring you in for? They said I had an open container. I didn't. I was driving my cousin's car and there was a bottle in the back seat. It was sealed. They opened it themselves and then they said it was open. The young woman's voice was barely a whisper. I've been here since 7 o'clock. No one will let me call my mom. Vanessa sat with that information for a long moment. Then she said, what is your name? Dara. Dara, I'm going to need you to remember everything you just told me. The exact time you arrived, what they said, what they did. Can you do that? Dara looked at her. Why? Vanessa said, because tomorrow morning things are going to change. She sat in that cell for 7 hours. She did not sleep, she observed. Mercer came by the holding cell twice that night. Both times she spoke to Vanessa through the bars with the casual cruelty of someone who has never had to face consequences. The second time, she held up Vanessa's judicial ID card, the one that had been in her purse, and turned it over in her fingers. Judge Monroe, she read, her voice carrying a slight theatrical emphasis. Newark County Circuit Court. She looked up. That's funny. I've got a cousin who does impersonation as a party trick. He's pretty convincing too. She pocketed the ID card and walked away. Vanessa didn't react. She made a note of the time, and she allowed herself one single thought before locking it away. She was going to dismantle this woman's career down to the foundation. At 4 in the morning, the overnight janitor made his rounds past the holding cell. He was an older man, slow and careful in his movements, and he wore a look of practiced invisibility. Vanessa caught his eye through the bars. Sir, she said quietly, My name is Vanessa Monroe. I am a judge in this county. I have been unlawfully detained. I need you to make a phone call for me. I will give you the number. It is the home number of Chief Judge Raymond Ocaffer of the Newark County Circuit Court. Please tell him where I am. The janitor looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked up the corridor both ways. What's the number? He said. Newark County Circuit Court opens its doors at 8 in the morning. By 7:45, Chief Judge Raymond Ocaffer was already in his office, and the phone call he had received at 4:37 a.m. had ensured that he had not slept since. He had made 3 calls of his own, one to the director of the state attorney's office, one to the head of the Internal Affairs Division of the Delwood PD, and one to a federal civil rights attorney named Harriet Voss, who was already in her car and on her way to the courthouse. The morning docket at the 3rd Precinct Intake Court, Courtroom 2, was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. It processed overnight arrests, arraignments, bail hearings, the daily processing of the people the police had decided, for one reason or another, needed to be off the streets. The presiding judge that morning was supposed to be the Honorable Timothy Carr, a man in his 60s who had a reputation for rubber stamping whatever the arresting officer presented. Judge Carr had called in sick at 7:45. His replacement, assigned at the direct request of Chief Judge Ocaffer, was a quiet, thorough woman named Judge Patricia Eldon, who had spent 8 years in federal civil rights litigation before moving to the bench. Officer Diane Mercer arrived at the courthouse at 8:50. She was carrying a travel mug and a printed copy of the incident report she had completed at 3 in the morning. She had listed the charges as DUI, resisting arrest, failure to obey a lawful order, and reckless driving. She had written in the sworn affidavit section that the defendant had smelled strongly of alcohol, had driven erratically across 2 lanes, and had become physically combative when asked to exit the vehicle. Every word of that report was a lie. Mercer knew that. But she had written similar reports dozens of times. The system in Delwood had a long, well-worn groove, and she had learned to run in it with her eyes closed. The defendant would see the stack of charges, panic, and take the plea deal. They always did. She was still feeling confident when the bailiff called the court to order at 9 o'clock. She was standing near the prosecution's table reviewing her notes when the side door opened and the defendants were brought in from holding. Vanessa Monroe walked in last. Her blazer was wrinkled. Her hair was damp. She had not slept, but she walked into that courtroom with the precise, measured step of someone who has spent years deciding the fates of other people in rooms exactly like this one. She stopped at the defendant's table and she stood. Mercer looked up. Their eyes met. Mercer felt nothing. She had not recognized the name. She had not run it through any database. She had not considered, even for a moment, that this woman might be anything other than exactly what she had decided she was. The bailiff, a man named Archie who had been in that courtroom for 11 years, walked in with his docket. He looked at the list. He looked at the defendant's table. He stopped walking. He looked at the list again. Then very slowly he looked at Vanessa. Vanessa gave him the smallest nod. Archie cleared his throat. All rise. The Newark County Circuit Court Intake Division is now in session, the Honorable Judge Patricia Eldon presiding. Judge Eldon swept in. She was a small woman with reading glasses and a face that gave nothing away. She took her seat and opened her docket. She read the first entry. She went very still. After a moment, she set her reading glasses on the bench and looked out at the courtroom. Bailiff, she said quietly, call the first case. Case number 2024 CR 4471, Archie said, and his voice was barely steady. State versus Vanessa Monroe. Mercer stepped up to the microphone at the officer's podium. Officer Diane Mercer, badge number 3317, representing the arresting officer. Good morning, Your Honor. The state is prepared, Officer Mercer. Judge Eldon's voice was quiet, but it stopped Mercer mid-sentence. Yes, Your Honor. Do you know who is standing at the defendant's table? Mercer glanced over. Yes, Your Honor, the defendant Vanessa Monroe, arrested last night on Route 9 for DUI and look again, Judge Eldon said. And Mercer looked, and this time something finally registered, the posture, the stillness. The way the woman at the defendant's table was watching her with those calm, absolute, terrifying eyes, the way the bailiff wouldn't look at her. The way the assistant district attorney at the far table had turned a very specific shade of white. Mercer began. Judge Monroe, Judge Eldon said, addressing the defendant's table directly, are you able to speak to the court? The title landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. Every ripple was visible, the murmur in the gallery, the Ada's sharp intake of breath, the way Mercer's coffee mug slipped slightly in her hand. Vanessa stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Your Honor, I am. Her voice was exactly the same as it had been on the side of the road. Controlled, precise. The voice of someone who has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. I am the Honorable Vanessa Monroe, Circuit Court Judge, Newark County. I have been in custody since 10:47 last night. I was stopped without probable cause, removed from my vehicle without lawful basis, denied my Miranda rights, denied my right to counsel, and held in a cell for approximately 10 hours while the arresting officer completed a sworn incident report containing multiple material falsehoods. She paused. The room was completely silent. I am not here to ask this court for anything related to myself. The charges against me are transparently fabricated, and I trust the court to address that in short order. What I am here to do is place on the record what I witnessed during my time in the 3rd Precinct Holding Facility, including the arrest of a 22-year-old woman named Dara Simmons, in whose case the arresting officers allegedly tampered with physical evidence. I am also here to submit, for the record, a formal complaint against Officer Diane Mercer, badge number 3317, for civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, perjury on a sworn police document, unlawful detention, and official misconduct. Mercer's coffee mug hit the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Judge Eldon looked at Mercer. Officer, I have before me your sworn affidavit stating that the defendant drove erratically, smelled of alcohol, and physically resisted arrest. Your Honor, she didn't identify herself as. She was not required to, Judge Eldon said flatly. The law does not change based on the identity of the person being detained. What it does require is probable cause, lawful procedure, and truthful reporting. Are you prepared to stand by the contents of your affidavit under oath? The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. I may have been, Mercer started. The conditions were difficult. It was raining. I may have, Officer Mercer. Judge Eldon's voice had gone very quiet. You filed a sworn statement to this court claiming a judge with 12 years on the bench drove drunk, smelled of alcohol, and attacked you. You have dashcam footage that has already been requested by Internal Affairs and which I am told does not corroborate any element of that statement. I am going to ask you one more time, are you prepared to stand by your affidavit? Mercer said nothing. Case dismissed, Judge Eldon said. The gavel came down, with prejudice. The gavel came down again. Bailiff, please contact the state attorney's office. I am requesting that they assign a prosecutor to the formal complaint filed by Judge Monroe. One more time. And will someone please escort Officer Mercer to the waiting area? The Internal Affairs Division has requested a meeting with her. The investigation that followed did not move slowly. When the target of a police misconduct complaint is a sitting judge, the machine moves differently. The dashcam footage was preserved and analyzed within 24 hours. It showed with complete clarity a car driving in a straight line at legal speed, pulling over immediately when the lights went on, and a driver who posed no threat of any kind. It showed an officer who ordered a woman out of her car without stating a reason, who handled her roughly, who never read her rights, and who spent 4 minutes alone inside the stopped vehicle. The body camera footage was incomplete. Mercer had turned it off 40 seconds into the encounter. That alone was a policy violation. Combined with the dashcam evidence and the sworn complaint from a circuit court judge, it was enough to place Mercer on immediate suspension pending a full investigation. But Internal Affairs didn't stop there. Once the file was open, the complaints that had been quietly filed and quietly buried over the past 12 years began to surface. 11 formal complaints, 23 informal ones. 14 instances in which the original complaint form had been routed directly to Mercer's precinct supervisor, a man named Captain Hollies, who had been Mercer's informal mentor since her 2nd year on the force. 6 of those forms had been marked, reviewed, no action required, in Hollies' handwriting. The state attorney's office opened a separate inquiry into Captain Hollies. Mercer, meanwhile, was at home. She had been placed on unpaid suspension, her weapon surrendered, her badge turned in. Her union representative had come to see her twice. The first visit had been to explain her rights. The second had been to explain, in careful, neutral language, that given the nature of the evidence and the identity of the complainant, the union was going to have difficulty providing more than nominal support. She sat in her apartment and watched the news. The story had broken by the 2nd day. Not loudly at first, a brief item on the local evening broadcast, a courthouse reporter noting that a circuit court judge had filed a misconduct complaint against a Delwood officer. But by the 3rd day it had grown. A civil rights organization in the state capitol had issued a statement calling for a full audit of Mercer's arrest record. Dara Simmons's attorney, retained pro bono the morning after Vanessa's release, had given a press conference on the courthouse steps. By the end of the week, Mercer's name was known throughout the state. She told herself it would blow over. She had made it through rough patches before. She told herself the judge was overreacting, that this was political, that the system would protect its own. But Delwood's system had decided with considerable speed that protecting Diane Mercer was no longer worth the cost. The state attorney's review of her arrest record went back 5 years. What it found was a pattern so consistent it looked deliberate, because it was. 37 cases in which the initial stop had been made on Route 9, late at night, involving black drivers in vehicles valued over $30,000. 11 of those had resulted in DUI charges. 9 had resulted in resisting arrest charges. In every single case, the dashcam footage told a different story from the incident report. 22 convictions were vacated. 11 people who had accepted plea deals on fabricated charges were exonerated. The city of Delwood began receiving civil lawsuit filings. By the end of the second month, the number had reached 31. Mercer was terminated. Her pension, 12 years of it, was revoked under the state's felony forfeiture statute when the formal criminal charges were filed. She was indicted on 7 counts: civil rights violations, perjury on a sworn document, official misconduct, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to deprive persons of constitutional rights. Her attorney advised her to take a plea. She refused. Her pride, the same pride that had made her laugh in Vanessa Monroe's face on a rainy shoulder of Route 9, still hadn't learned to be afraid of consequences. She demanded a trial. The federal courthouse in the state capitol is a severe, dignified building with marble floors and high windows that let in a particular quality of cold, clear light. It was in that light, 8 months after the arrest on Route 9, that Officer Diane Mercer sat at the defense table in a gray suit that didn't quite fit, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the prosecution begin its case. The trial lasted 4 days. The dashcam footage was played for the jury. The body camera footage, the portion that existed, was played. Officer Garrett from the booking desk testified about the discrepancies between what he observed and what Mercer had written in her report. Dura Simmons testified about the sealed bottle that had been opened. The 11 complainants whose convictions had been vacated testified, one after another, about what had happened to them on the shoulder of Route 9. On the third day, the prosecution called their final witness. The Honorable Vanessa Monroe walked to the stand in a charcoal suit, took her oath with the same calm that had been the first thing Mercer had misread about her, and testified for 3 hours. She did not testify with anger. She did not testify with visible grievance. She testified the way she presided, methodically, precisely, with every fact in its proper place and every legal principle correctly cited. She walked the jury through the constitutional framework of unlawful detention. She walked them through every moment of that night on Route 9. She walked them through what she had observed in the holding cell at the 3rd Precinct. And she walked them through the broader pattern that Mercer's arrest record revealed: a decade-long practice of targeting black drivers on a specific road, generating fabricated charges, and counting on a system that had been content to look the other way. Mercer's defense attorney cross-examined her for 22 minutes. He had very little material to work with. Everything Vanessa said was supported by video, by records, or by multiple witnesses. When he finished and sat down, there was nothing left to attack. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. When they came back, Mercer stood. The room was completely quiet. The foreman read each verdict in a clear, level voice, and with each word, Mercer seemed to become slightly smaller. Guilty on civil rights violations. Guilty on perjury. Guilty on official misconduct. Guilty on evidence tampering. Guilty on conspiracy to deprive persons of constitutional rights. The federal judge, a man named Honorable Charles Whitmore, who had been on the bench for 21 years, looked at Mercer for a long moment before he spoke. When he did, his voice was measured and final. Officer Mercer, you were given a badge and a responsibility by the people of this state. You used that badge as a weapon against those same people for 12 years. You targeted vulnerable individuals with the deliberate, calculated knowledge that they would likely not have the resources to fight back. You filed false reports, you corrupted evidence, you denied constitutional rights, and you did it systematically over and over again, while your supervisors enabled you and your victims quietly absorb the damage. He paused. The court sentences you to 96 months in a federal correctional facility with no eligibility for early release. Your law enforcement certification is permanently revoked. You will not at any point in your life hold a position of public authority again. Mercer said nothing. There was nothing left to say. In the gallery, Vanessa Monroe watched the marshals lead her out. She didn't look away and she didn't look satisfied. She looked like someone who has seen a thing that needed to be done and watched it get done, and now has to go back to the long, complicated work of trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. She stood when the courtroom was called to order for its next case. She smoothed her jacket. She walked out into the cold November light. Behind her, the door of the courtroom swung shut. 8 months after the arrest on Route 9, the Newark County Circuit Court announced the creation of a new oversight program, the first of its kind in the state, requiring all traffic stop footage to be filed with an independent review board within 72 hours of the stop. The program was proposed by the chief judge of the circuit. Its lead architect, the person who had written the original proposal and shepherded it through 3 rounds of revision and 2 legislative hearings, was the Honorable Vanessa Monroe. She didn't hold a press conference about it. She didn't give interviews. When a reporter asked her what she thought about the program being called the Monroe Initiative by people in the legal community, she said, "It should be named after the people who needed it, not the people who had the power to demand it." Dara Simmons, the young woman from the holding cell, had her record expunged. She went back to community college the following semester. She changed her major to criminal justice. Captain Hollies resigned before the internal investigation concluded. He submitted his resignation on a Tuesday afternoon with a 2-line letter and no public statement. And Officer Diane Mercer served her sentence in a federal facility outside the state. She had no visitors listed in her first 6 months there. She had told herself that night on Route 9 that she was the law, the judge, and the executioner. She had been wrong about all 3. The law was the thing she had violated. The judge was the woman she had handcuffed and laughed at. And the execution she had carried out slowly, methodically over 12 years had been the execution of her own future. She had looked at a woman standing in the rain and seen only a target. She had not looked carefully enough. She had not looked at all.